It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! And if I sound like I have a bit more pep in the Feedback Friday song this week, it's because I do. I'm excited to do Feedback Friday this week because people asked questions and they were good questions instead of just using the comment section to get on a soapbox and act like assholes. And I am so thrilled by that. Thank you guys. You're the best. It's so nice to have a comment section that actually does what comment sections are to me supposed to do, which is provide feedback and isolate and indicate gaps in understanding. Where do we need more information, as opposed to trying to guess every single thing that somebody may want to know. And the response to Wednesday's video on Canada's cabinet shuffle brought forward two fairly key questions that I thought were actually questions and not someone wanting to be a jerk. So, and they came from multiple people as well. So I think that's super important. The first one was, what exactly does the status of women office in Canada do? And this is a very good question because it's moved around a lot. And I'm not going to get into the entire history of the whole role of status of women in the Canadian government, but it has bounced between the state portfolio to the heritage portfolio, back and forth. And because it was getting caught in between those two realms, is it an issue of state, meaning various structures, or is it an issue of heritage, which is more of a culture thing? The answer came back yes, and so they created a specific position for it not that long ago. And this is one of those things where, because I spend a lot of time in this sphere, it's easy to have this knee-jerk reaction of, oh God, why don't people know this? Which is what the Twitter explanation would be, right? It would be, it's not my job to explain women what I want. Why do all these people end up sounding like Eric Cartman? Because Eric Cartman's funny, and these people are not at all pleasant to deal with, I think. But the original idea for something involving the status of women in Canada goes all the way back to 1967, excuse me, when Lester B. Pearson, the guy our Toronto airport is named after, to ensure equal opportunities for men and women in all aspects of Canadian society. And in 1970, a report came out, and this is to show you how far things have come. And yes, I'm using Wikipedia just because it puts it all in easy bullet points. I know it's not the best source, but 167 recommendations, including gender and marital status be prohibited as grounds for discrimination by employers, training programs more open, more women judges, more qualified women in the Senate, maternity leave, birth control, all this stuff, like stuff we take for granted today. At least in Canada, birth control isn't so taken for granted in the US right now. But this wasn't that long ago, 1970, okay? So that was where it started. The role and the necessity of it has evolved over the years to the point that the status of women role in Canada right now is quite complex, and the website doesn't do a great job about it. It does sort of bullet point it again, but one of the major things it does is to liaise with the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. It's basically, okay, the United Nations says this, so this is our field office in Canada. Boom. And trying to create, Canada-specific solutions to some of these issues that the United Nations have identified. Now, it is true that the vast majority of the work that the Status of Women Commission does is in communities, either northern communities, both, rural and Inuit communities, poverty-stricken communities, what they call racialized communities, and then our indigenous communities. And the big one that really suffered under the clawbacks to the program that the Harper government put in was this issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And for people who aren't aware, I've talked about this before, an alarming number. And this is one of these difficult situations where this is intersectionalism right here. This is what it's supposed to do, that we have this issue of wanting to make sure women are not unduly targeted for specific types of violence. Also dealing with the fact that Aboriginal communities have a distrust of the federal government because of some historical atrocities committed against them. So what do you do about this? Well, this is what the Status of Women office and then the organizations devoted to working with Aboriginal peoples have to work on together. And if you don't have an advocate at the table for both these interests, then something gets left behind. You have to be at the table. All interests have to be represented. In a larger point regarding domestic violence, in our country at least, this is not something I can talk about anywhere else. We apparently have a serious reporting problem in Canada when it comes to intimate partner violence, spousal violence, that sort of thing. You'll see some of the statistics right here. You'll note the part where it says that in terms of violence, our reporting rates suck. Actual physical injuries, 4 out of 10 female victims report injuries compared to just under a quarter of male victims. So we have a real shame dynamic going on. We have a lot of work to do on this. And I agree that, how do I put this? A woman is more likely to be financially dependent on a man in a marriage or some sort of domestic arrangement just because women have the babies. And right now, women are given maternity leave. Men are not given equivalent parental leave. So if you decide to have a child, there is a point where you are financially dependent on someone or some entity because you cannot work. And Canada has a birth rate problem. So this is something that we address through immigration, yes, because we take in immigrants to replace the people we're not giving birth to, but we have to make it easier for women to have babies as well. And this is something that is important to me because my original plan for my life, I was going to have kids by this point, didn't happen for various elements. So this is something near and dear to my heart. But the cool thing about the Status of Women office in Canada is something called GBA+. A lot of these issues that I just talked about, parental leave, certain medical things, immigration, this sort of thing, instead of saying they're women's issues, they are calling it now gender-based analysis. And it says, as you'll notice, taking into account the changing realities and inequalities of Canadian women and men. And you'll see that it says the plus in the name highlights the GBA plus goes beyond gender and includes the examination of a range of other intersecting identity factors such as age, education, language, geography, culture, and income. And so it's possible eventually our Status of Women ministry will evolve, as it continues to do, into a status of gender or into a status of culture or whatever. It didn't work as straight up heritage, but it is not ignoring men in this equation. And I think that's a concern, rightly, for a lot of guys and a lot of women who care about men who they have seen either become victims of domestic violence or what I call emotional domestic battery. Men who went through a very dark time and could not get access to mental health services during suicidal periods, people who perhaps, did die by suicide and couldn't get help even though they wanted it. It is, well, I'd like to say it's undeniable, but I keep seeing people deny it, that the biggest, risk group for suicide is white men over 40, and it keeps being reported like it's a teenager issue. And this is, what something like GBA Plus is designed to do. So I hope that shed some light on something that people seemed honestly interested in knowing. So it's not a question of giving women special privileges. It's not a question of giving women a leg up. It's a question of better understanding these issues that, well, not entirely gender-based, do tend to affect women more. Now, the second question I got is similar, but it's on a different point. How multiculturalism and integration are compatible. And it's interesting because this person defines multiculturalism as separate but equal, and that is not the way multiculturalism is understood in Canada. It's there's the way it was explained to me is that there's two types of multiculturalism that you can practice. One is melting pot multiculturalism, which is what's practiced in the US, at a state level, which is you come there, you are American, and you adopt American culture and American identity and all this stuff. And in Canada, and this really got going under our current Prime Minister's father, our former Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. He couldn't get shawarma in Montreal and liked shawarma. And he decided that there was too much melting pot multiculturalism in Canada. He advocated a form of multiculturalism called Mosaic multiculturalism, which incidentally informs my concept of feminism that you'll be hearing more about in this year, the idea of Mosaic Feminism. And what Mosaic multiculturalism means is that it is not, you can keep the aspects of your culture that you like, provided they do not explicitly come into conflict with certain Canadian values we can all agree on. So, for instance, a cultural practice like wearing a headscarf, fine. You are no less aligned with Canadian values because you wear a headscarf. Something like an honor killing is a cultural practice from certain parts of the world that is not allowed as part of the Canadian identity. We do not condone, we actively oppose the practice of honor killings. So that's what Mosaic multiculturalism means. It means that basically a mosaic is a form of art made up of these little individual tiles. Pretty. All these little individual tiles make up one bigger picture. And so if you think about our type of multiculturalism, Canadian multiculturalism, you can be any one of these tiles, and some tiles are red, some are green, some are black, some are white, and so on. They're different shapes, but you gotta still be on the board. So certain practices are not part of this mosaic, but there are a lot of them that are. And this form of multiculturalism, I believe, is the best way to balance what this commenter believes is multiculturalism and integration, because it makes the barrier to integration lower. There are certain things that people do have to adapt to when they come to Canada, the weather being one of them. When the highly popularized wave of Syrian refugees arrived here, one of the things that the government did was outfit them with clothes appropriate to Canadian winters, because they're coming from a very different climate. And these are things that certain aspects of life in a lot of parts of Canada, basically everything east of the mountain range that makes BC's climate very different. Well, parts of BC have a very different climate. If you go to Vancouver, its weather is more like Seattle than the rest of Canada. But You know, if you live in BC, you might be able to get by without a really heavy duty winter coat, but not many other places will allow you to do that. And so it's things like that. It's, you know, if you come from England, you can't still drive on the left side of the road. You have to drive on the right side of the road. So this has really been hyped up as this idea that certain cultural aspects are not cannot be integrated with a Western identity. And Canada really doesn't agree. We think that people, it doesn't matter if you look different, as long as you are open to accepting that things like democracy and personal freedom and equality are things that are non-negotiable here. And our system believes that this is the best way to integrate people, to give them fewer things that they have to adapt to. So that's our view, and this is sort of where I get my idea of Mosaic feminism from, where, you know, to me, the place where third wave feminism broke down and the idea of intersectional feminism broke down is that they expected too much conformity. They expected too much integration, and then the question becomes, you know, who sets the rules? Who decides what the checklist is for allowance into the feminist club, right? And it became a very Marxist-inspired stripping away of any feminine identifiers. Boobs were bad, long hair was bad, you know, dresses were bad, heels, lipstick, bows, all that stuff, all the things associated with the feminine were being increasingly stripped out in an increasingly rigid, high-tension ideological signifiers. And that doesn't work. You know, we see what happens when you give people too many rules. They can't keep them all straight, and they just go, screw it. I can't win. I can't be this. Screw you all, and screw your stupid identifier. Screw your word. If this is what feminism is, I don't want to be a part of it. I'm not a feminist. Fuck off, right? That's what's happening. And if we reduce the number of concepts, if we make it easier for someone to be a tile on the board, then more people will be accepting of the idea of, you know, the basic idea that what we want is equality. I don't think you'll meet too many people who disagree with that argument. I think that some people may believe that there are natural roles for men and natural roles for women, and they're too rigid, but I think that nobody will openly go, I think it's okay to oppress someone, right? There are thought gymnastics around acknowledging that's what certain regimes do. But there are other things in terms of socialization that I think we need to look at here. And one thing I'm very bullish on is the fact that the socialization, the typical socialization for girls, does not align with the skills and mindset that will allow you to succeed in a modern economy. You know, this idea of getting along with everyone and feeling like there's something wrong with you if someone doesn't like you. The complete waste of energy that goes into trying to make sure everybody thinks you're good and awesome. That will destroy you when you get out into the business world. You will spend all your time trying to be popular and spend not enough time trying to be effective. You know, the focus on trying to appear physically perfect instead of being the best you can be. This is still something that affects women a lot more than men. And I know some people absolutely vociferously disagreed with me on this point earlier in the week in the Hidden Figures video, but it is undeniable that there is greater diversity of representation of men in the media than there are for women, most notably in comedy. Most notably in comedy. We have done better in terms of dramas, but there are too many women in comedy defined by being the girlfriend, the mom, or the wife. And even the new so-called progressive sitcoms, there's a show called Working Moms that is premiering on the CBC. Mom is right in the title. And this is an issue because when it comes to leadership, leaders have to be, by definition, at the top of the food chain. And if we have trouble thinking about a woman as the center of the branch, the top of the food chain, that she is the one that everybody relates to, as opposed to being defined by who she is, being defined by it relationally, well, it is very hard for women to be respected as leaders. And this is not something that men did to us. This is something that society, of which we are 51%, did to us. So the problems, involving women are 51% self-created, just by how much we make up of society. And people don't want to hear this, but if you're looking at this picture, right? If you're looking at this mosaic, that big white center, is that the thing everything else revolves around, or is that an empty space? It depends on your perspective, doesn't it? And someone like a Donald Trump, someone like a George Clooney, someone like, George Clooney is a shining example, because if you actually look at the accomplishments between him and his wife, Amal, she massacres him, right? I mean, she's done a lot more real good for the world, but people refer to him as Mr. Amal Clooney as a joke. So these are the sorts of things we have to look at. And this is why I like the idea of Mosaic Feminism, because Mosaic Feminism allows that, a woman that takes her husband's name, for instance. Well, she might be a blue dot here. And a woman who keeps her married name is a red dot. And a woman who hyphenates her name is a white dot, right? But they're all on the board. We don't get into this idea of what's right for women, what will advance women, and it's all part of the same picture. It's all part of the same jigsaw puzzle. And I think this is much healthier than the current stupid fight. We're fighting over stupidity. We're fighting, who cares in the grand scheme of things if Amal Clooney changed her name? The woman is clearly no shrinking violet. Who cares if I change my name? I am clearly no shrinking violet, because my attitude was, it was my father's name to begin with. I didn't get to choose whether I got my mother's surname or my father's surname. My parents made that choice for me. It was not my choice. The choice I make is whether to keep it or change it, but no matter what, someone else has the same name. So it's all about what team you want to align yourself with. There is no better or worse answer. And I get the idea of not, if some people like their name, I mean, Hillary Rodham Clinton didn't change her name when she got married, and it was a big deal. It shouldn't have been. What's in a name? Shakespeare said this all this time ago. What's in a name? And people make it big, huge deal. And it's the same thing about gender, right? Like, what's in identifying as male or female? For some people, it is incredibly important, and they agonize over it. They don't feel male. They don't feel female. And I think in a relatively small number of cases, there is something going on, that's something physiological. It's not mental, it's physiological. Something is going on there. But for most of us, this is just, it's not about whether you feel male or whether you feel female. It's whether you align with what society tells you your gender is supposed to be. I'm not supposed to like superheroes in video games, or fast cars, Or, laser guns that go pew pew laser. I want a gun that actually says pew pew laser. No, I'm kidding. But these are not traditionally feminine things. But I reject the idea that this makes me less female. I don't just sort out girly things, because I bake cookies. I bake cakes. And I reject that this is a traditional feminine role. I learned to do it because there's a whole bunch of things I can't eat, and the only way I can enjoy cake without a stomach ache is if I know exactly what's in it. This is practical. This is chemical engineering as far as I'm concerned. I know what ingredients go into it. It's frickin' potions class. It's in Harry Potter. It's all about perspective. And I want to set the example. I want to leave this world having fought the fight to say, being a woman, identifying as a woman, does not tell me what I can and cannot like and what I can and cannot do, except pee standing up. That's a messy proposition for me. But this is important. It's important that we, again, here's the Mosaic approach. It's important that we include and allow dignity for people that are transgendered, that have made that choice. But it's also important for people who are just gender non-conforming, and to make this whole thing less of a big deal. Because guess what? If it's less of a big deal, then we worry less about what bathroom people choose to use. But we also worry less about whether a girl likes sports, math, or video games. And we allow women the right to be an individual. We allow women to occupy their own special space as a tile on the board. And this is incredibly important, because right now there are forces out there encouraging women to think about themselves not as an individual, but as a cog in a much greater machine called class. And while that might have worked temporarily to get things like voting rights or something like Title IX access to post-secondary education, it does not do very well when it comes to leadership. Leadership figures must be self-defined. They must clearly see themselves as individuals. And when we're asking women to submit to a greater collective, to become an anonymous part of a greater thing called womanhood, or back in the day, the sisterhood, well, that denies them leadership as an individual. We cannot do that anymore. The stakes have changed. The challenge has changed. We must allow women to be individuals with strengths and weaknesses, so we can compete as individuals and hit that white center on this mosaic. This is important. And so we have to adapt accordingly. And I don't know where to come in for a landing on this. But this is what we're going to talk about moving forward. And I'm sure some people are going to be very unhappy with me about this. But again, think about the way I see things. I'm not saying my journey, my tile on the mosaic invalidates yours. And this is going to cut down on a lot of fighting, because these, the people who advocate for male issues, like the suicide rate, like, the stigma against male emotion, like, some of these issues, how fatherhood fits in the whole male identity, that kind of stuff, they're on this board too. And it just stops us from all trying to fight for existence. I mean, yes, we will still have the fight as people try to get closer to that center in the metaphor. But that's different than not being on the board at all. You know what I mean? It's significantly important, and I think that we need solutions that don't ask certain groups to just wait their turn. We need to come up with solutions to things that everybody feels somewhat included in a solution. They may not be totally satisfied. No one ever is, but at least they get something. So I hope you found this informative. I'm just going to stop now. I have no elegant way out. I've been struggling for 10 minutes to try to find an elegant way out of this, and I don't have one. So I'll just say have a good weekend.